The race to the moon.
Delayed technological advancements.
In 1957, Sputnik 1 was launched by the Soviet Union. This was during the space race or race to the moon. The Soviet Union and the United States competed against each other to see who would be the first into space and then on the moon. During periods of time between the two countries, there were opportunities for the Soviet Union and the United States to work together. If the Soviet Union and the United States had worked jointly using diplomacy rather than competition, technological advancements and the moon landings may have come sooner. We interviewed former NASA Shuttle and Soyuz astronaut Steve Swanson, and when we asked him about this idea, he told us.
In the long run, it would have been better, I think, to work collaboratively with the Russians, develop things together, pool our resources, and develop systems together. That would have helped out, I think, better, but not the way it happened.
From the end of World War II until December 1991, the USSR and the USA were in a Cold War. This is when there is political hostility between different sides, generally between countries, but no open conflict. The Cold War basically began when the Soviet Union took over Eastern Europe in 1947 and ended in late December 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Although there was no open conflict during this time, there was great diplomatic tension between the two countries. In the USA, air raid tests became a part of everyday life. On October 4th, 1957, the USSR became the first to launch an artificial Earth satellite, Sputnik 1. This began a new phase of the Cold War, the space race, and the Soviets were in the lead.
Because Sputnik 1's sort of sparked the American public's interest in space. If Sputnik 1 was never launched or launched later on, do you think the space race would still have turned out the same way?
Probably not. I think that was a crucial moment in the whole space race. It started the space race, really, right? And so that was a really crucial moment. And the fact that they were ahead of us in that aspect of it put much more pressure on the United States program, NASA itself, to compete and do fat things quickly and try to catch up. And so if the Russians had done that later, we wouldn't have had that pressure and things would have gone much slower. So I do think that was a big push, a big point where everybody realized that we need to put some money and effort into the space program. And so that was a huge impetus to this whole program.
At the time, there was no way to tell what Sputnik 1 was, and the U.S. military was worried that it could possibly be a way for the USSR to spy on them. Every 98 minutes for 22 days, as it circled the globe, Sputnik 1 reminded the world what it was with its signature beep. The Americans may have been worried that the Soviets were able to spy on them from space, but an even bigger worry was that it could have been a nuclear weapon.
At the end of World War II, the US and the Soviet Union both hired German rocket scientists and put them to work for their space agencies, and because the two countries did not trust each other, they both developed their own rocket programs. Wernher von Braun was the most famous in the USA and worked for NASA, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and Sergei Korolev was the most famous from the USSR. Both countries spent the next decade launching satellites and testing spacecraft in the race to become the first to do things in space.
The first artificial satellite and first signals from space, Sputnik 1, October 4th, 1957, USSR.
The first mammal to orbit Earth was Lake of the Dog, November 3rd, 1957, USSR.
The first solar-powered satellite, March 17, 1958, USA.
The first to leave Earth's orbit and first lunar flyby was on January 2nd, 1959, USSR.
The first photograph of Earth from orbit was taken August 7th, 1959, USA.
The first hard landing on the moon, which was the first unmanned satellite, was September 14th, 1959, USSR.
The first capsule recovered from orbit with animals and plants alive was August 19th, 1960, USSR.
The first primate in space, Ham, January 31st, 1961, USA.
The first human in space flight, Yuri Gagarin, April 12, 1961, USSR.
The first unmanned planetary flyby of Venus, May 19, 1961, USSR.
At this point, the USSR seemed to be winning the space race, and on May 25, 1961, U.S. President John F. Kennedy announced his goal that by the end of the decade, the U.S. would land men on the moon and return them safely back to Earth. The goal was reached 8 years later on July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 was launched. 4 days later, on July 20, it reached the moon. There were 3 astronauts on Apollo 11: Michael Collins, Buzz Aldrin, and Neil Armstrong. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon. Neil Armstrong was first. When he stepped onto the moon, he made the famous statement,
"It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind."
Michael Collins was the only crew member that didn't stand on the moon, as he stayed in the command module. On July 24th, after more than 8 days in space, they returned safely home to Earth.
There were 5 more Apollo missions, landing a total of 12 astronauts on the moon. The numbers for these missions were 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17. Although the USSR had never landed a man on the moon, they continued working on their space program and achieved many more firsts in low Earth orbit and in building the first space station in April 1971 with the Salyut program. Pieces of the Salyut are still in orbit today at the core of the International Space Station.
Throughout this time, there was very little to no communication between the US and the USSR. During the 1950s and 1960s, there was always talk of working together, but the Cold War kept them from actually doing anything together. Had there been better communication and diplomacy, would it have made a difference? Would it have been a good or bad thing if it had? Do you think that the Soviet Union and America should have worked together during the space race?
Again, that would have been nice if they could have worked together. The fact though that we were in the Cold War would have made that almost impossible. We were kind of enemies at that time. And so, I mean, even look at right now, we are enemies at this moment. And we're still working together. The people on the space station are still working together. Roscosmos, the Russian Space Agency, and NASA are working together. That might not be perfect. I don't think any new stuff probably will come out right now just because of the current situation. However, what we're doing on the International Space Station will continue, I believe, because both people realize how important it is. It needs to be done, and we need each other to keep it going.
We offer up the Apollo-Soyuz program as proof that advancements in technology would have come sooner with better diplomacy.
On July 15, 1975, the USSR and the USA both launched rockets carrying astronauts or cosmonauts into space as part of the Apollo-Soyuz test project. 2 days later, on July 17th, nearly 6 years to the day after the first moon landing, Americans and Soviets shook hands in space, formally, for many people, ending the space race. The American astronauts were Thomas P. Stafford, Vance D. Brand, and Deke Slayton. The Soviet cosmonauts were Alexei Leonov and Valery Kubasov. The mission was successful but short-lived. 2 days later, after conducting many experiments together, they separated and returned home.
I really believe that we were sort of an example to the countries, astronaut Vance Brand said in a NASA oral history interview in 2000. We were a little of a spark or a foot in the door that started better communications.
Soyuz Apollo mission did work together. And so that can be done. I thought that was it was actually a good way to bring I guess some communication between the two countries to get them to start seeing each other not as foes, but as friends. And that's one thing I thought that the space agencies or space exploration has done well for all these different countries that are involved in it. And that the more we can work together, the more we can get over the differences we have and can work together. And so I think that's a huge plus for space exploration. However, it can be still very difficult in times of stress, war, etc.
This was the last time American astronauts were launched into space aboard an American space capsule until 2020. The U.S. shifted their space program to shuttle missions in 1991. The definite end of the space race occurred with the collapse of the USSR. Russians and Americans began a joint program called the Shuttle Mir in 1993. The U.S., using their shuttles over 11 missions, carried Russian cosmonauts and supplies to the Mir station. The program ended in 1998 following a collision and fire on the Mir station in 1997. Then, in 1998, the construction of the International Space Station began. It was finished in 2012, another international mission in space.
Because of the success of the Apollo-Soyuz project and later the Shuttle Mir and now the International Space Station, we believe that had diplomacy been possible during the Cold War, the technological advancements that did come after the space race would have come much sooner.